Hi everyone, thanks for joining another one of our lunchtime tech sessions. For those that don't know me, I'm Neil Hamilton. I'm the General Manager of Canterbury Tech, and thanks to Greg Garratt for joining us today. As per usual, I'll do a couple of minutes talking, then hand over to Greg. So I shall do my usual, share a couple of slides. So these lunchtime tech sessions, we've run them for the last few months, and we're going to continue to run them, intersperse them with our in-person events. And although we're going to return to in-person events from the 8th of June onwards on a monthly basis, we'll probably intersperse them with mid-month lunchtime tech sessions like this. So thanks for joining us. Today, we're very fortunate to have Greg, CEO of Medi-Map, join us. A couple of things coming up. One that we haven't quite got on here yet, but might be of interest to some of you, is an NZ Tech Story workshop that we're going to be running in conjunction with NZ Tech and Christchurch NZ. That's going to be on the 23rd of June at Christchurch NZ. If you're not aware of it, there's a lot of work gone into developing the NZ Tech Story over the last 18 months or so. So there's a whole lot of assets available that employers can use for different purposes, either as part of your marketing efforts to customers or to employers. So keep an eye out for the details of that. Put it in your diary, afternoon of the 23rd of June, Christchurch NZ. I think it made it into our last newsletter, and there's some other things going on as well. Finally, Electrify Aotearoa, 26th of May, been postponed multiple times, and Itipu in June, big agri-tech summit at Te Pai, the new convention centre. And our big thing, of course, is the Tech Summit, 24th of November. Tickets are not yet on sale. In fact, we haven't quite even sorted a date out, but I do have a few speakers locked in. Not going to tell you who they are just yet, got to tease you a little bit more. If, however, you're keen to sponsor this, the highlight of the tech calendar in Canterbury every year, then do get in touch. We've got a small number of sponsorship opportunities available, so get in touch with me or Alex, Tech Summit Manager. Other way, Neil. And oh, that was quick. Over to Greg. There was one other thing. There we are. That's what I wanted to talk about. Wednesday, 8th of June. Our monthly events are normally on a Tuesday, so if it's in your calendar as the first Tuesday of the month, it's not going to be in June. It's going to be first Wednesday, 8th of June at Trimble. The theme is High Tech Awards. We've got one of last year's winners and 3 of this year's finalists, all local people, to talk a little bit about their company. And I'm a trustee of the High Tech Trust that's behind the High Tech Awards. All of the trustees will be in town that day, and most will be attending this evening event, so come along and meet some of them. And that's about all I wanted to say, and I'm going to hand over now to Greg Garratt, CEO of Medi-Map, to tell us a little about his journey. Greg, over to you.
Thanks, Neil, and welcome to everyone. Please feel free to fire any questions into the chat for Neil to ask me, but what I'll do today is I'll just give you an overview of the question we call is, how the hell did we end up here? So I'll just explain where we started, where we came from, what we did, the challenges that we faced, which I know are not unique to us, and hopefully give some insight on how we overcame them. So I'll just do a screen share, and I'll share, so I'll just run a few slides so that you can actually see what we're talking about. So I'm a pharmacist by qualification, And if you'd said to me 11 years ago, you won't be working in a pharmacy, you'll be working in technology with a technology-based company, I would have laughed at you, to be completely honest. So my wife is a pharmacist as well. We owned a range of pharmacies, and we had this problem. So the concept of what we've done all stemmed from a real life problem that we had and we dealt with every single day. So in one of our pharmacies, we received on average annually around 75,000 faxes a year. So it's an enormous number of faxes. In fact, health is probably the reason why fax machines still exist, because of all the faxing that goes on. So doing the numbers across the country for pharmacy anyway, 25 million faxes a year were floating around in 2012 with pharmacy. So the problem, look, it's pretty obvious what the problem was. We were drowning in paper, absolutely drowning in paper. Couldn't read them, faxing to us multiple pages at a time. And the question is, well, what was on these faxes? They were copies of prescriptions, they were drug charts from care organizations. They were all critical things for us as a pharmacy to provide medication and medication management services. And the biggest problem that we had was you couldn't read them. You literally couldn't read them. If you couldn't read the fax, you couldn't read the doctor's handwriting. So it was a massive compounding issue. And then you had all of these issues. So, you know, over 10 years, we were storing 750,000 pieces of paper, because in health, you have to store all of those paper records for 10 years. So 750,000 pieces of paper we were storing. And if you needed to find something from 12 months ago, you can imagine what happened. It was just a nightmare. So one of our pharmacies, I was talking to one of our care organizations one day and said, this is just crazy stuff. How do we fix it? You know, what could we do? And the manager of this aged care facility said to me, oh, my son's a software developer. Why don't you ever talk to him? I went, oh, sure. Yeah, very flippantly, I talked to him, and we moved to the process we call, which is the problem-solving environment, which is usually a cafe. So I met with our developer in a cafe, and of course he was a relatively new graduate, as you know, as poor as a church mouse, and so yeah. And so I sat down with him and explained what our problem was, and we literally did the serviette thing, because he said, can you just draw what you're dealing with? And so I just drew it out, literally. And the sad thing is I still have that serviette today of what we drew, what we thought we might try and do. So we went through and had a conversation around it, and he decided that, yeah, we could do this. This would be no problem. We'll throw something together. So we literally threw something together. So we went through that whole process of, you know, well, we should probably talk to the users that we're going to talk to, doctors. We should talk to the nurses. We understood the pharmacy. And the big question we were trying to work out in our mind was, could we actually get this to work? Would this actually work? And how much are we going to spend? So the answer to the first one, could we get this to work? The answer was maybe. Different user groups, they thought it was a great idea. How much would it cost? We had no idea. We had no idea what we were going to be up for. And do we think it'll solve our problem? And so we did an initial build. We had a care organisation, we had a bunch of GPs involved, and we had us as the pharmacy involved, and we put together a cloud service which was pretty rough and ready, and it worked. And I know that's really sad, but it actually worked. Within 3 months, we had a prototype which removed all of the faxing, allowed the pharmacy, the doctors, and the care organisations to be looking at a single source of truth around medicines management. So we were pretty happy. We were only interested in solving what we were dealing with locally. Did it work? Yes, it did. Did it remove the faxes? Removed about 90% of the faxes from what we were currently dealing with. The biggest problem we had was the regulator. So we were totally breaking the law. In New Zealand in 2012, 2013, there was nothing within the Medicines Regulations and the Medicines Act that allowed the use of an electronic signature as an authorization on anything, literally nothing. And I got a phone call from a very big pharmacy in Auckland wanting to know if they could have a look at some software that he'd heard we'd developed and were using. And I confessed to my colleague that, yeah, I could show him, but we had no permission to use it. Yes, it did solve our problem, but we were probably getting into deep, dark water with lots of sharks if we progressed beyond what we were currently doing. So Chris and I decided, who was our lead developer, that we would fly to Wellington and have a meeting with the Ministry of Health. At the time, it was the National Health IT Board, and with HealthCert. And we walked into the meeting anticipating a cease and desist because we were literally operating outside of the law. So we showed them what we had done to the Ministry of Health. And 3 reactions occurred in that meeting. The first one was, how much did you spend? And we said, oh, about 20 grand. And they were gobsmacked that we could do something for 20 grand to start with, that 2, solved the problem that we were looking at. And 3, they were really keen on assisting us to try and get further around a digital enablement. So the Ministry of Health and HealthCert worked with us for 6 months, just around some very broad certification process, which they literally made up as they went because they had no idea. And we got a waiver from the Director General 2014, which allowed us to become legitimate, I suppose would be the word. Now, the burden of dealing with the health bureaucracy as a pharmacist from a pharmacy with a software developer, I can't overestimate how much work that was for us as an organization. If we'd been able to work with anyone that had some expertise or experience in taking something and then presenting it at a government level, that would have been hugely time-saving and stress-saving for us. So we essentially sat down and worked out what the hell we were actually trying to achieve and how it would all work to try and get an approval to actually allow us to go forward, which we did achieve. What we found was, as we went through that process, there was a whole lot of stuff that we hadn't considered. Not having a technology background in any way or form, we were learning a lot very, very quickly about authentication, around security, around probably less so cloud, but more around the fact that most of New Zealand's health system at that point in time was on paper, and devices were expensive, and Wi-Fi setups across organizations were very expensive to do. And so we had this issue around trying to convince all of our user groups around spending a truckload of money to put Wi-Fi through your old building and spend $1,000 per device on 10 devices to actually use our platform. So the positive with it was the aged care sites that we started with, and they committed. They could see the vision of what we were trying to achieve. And then they worked with us really closely. And the thing I learned from it was, as an IT company, especially operating in health, is to get alongside the users or the prospective customers and take them on the journey with you is really important. And to work with them quite closely and understand their perspective. So one of the things that we spent a lot of time trying to understand was the fact that a doctor's way of thinking is completely different to a pharmacist's way of thinking, which is completely different to a nurse's way of thinking, which is completely different to a customer or person in the community. Their thinking is quite different, and the way they approach and problem solve or do things is very, very different. So we ended up investing internally around more staff to specifically liaise and work really closely with each different user group so that the context of what their access gave them was appropriate to them. So rather than, I'm not preaching to the converted here, but we spent a huge amount of time sitting with our users to understand their workflow. And rather than us presenting something that we thought that's how we think they work, we absorbed what they did and then worked out how could we do it better, and then presented that back to them before we even started to build anything. And what we found was we were able to take all of our users on the journey over the next 7 years, from idea to getting the tick off from the regulator, and then going through the whole process of how do we make this better for our users. So we have really good engagement with our users, and the reason is our users now totally drive our development rather than the regulator driving our development or what we think we could do driving our development. It's all driven by our users. So we suddenly struck this inflection point, running at a loss year 1, running at a loss year 2, running at a loss year 3, running at a loss year 4. So my wife and I obviously funded heavily over those 4 years as we expanded the team. It absorbed an enormous amount of money, as it would do. And we hit this inflection point of, oh my God, we made $1, which is fantastic. And it's a big moment to celebrate where you go from investing heavily to actually making literally $1, because that's the inflection point that it all gets really serious all of a sudden at that point in time. So what happened was, as we rolled out, we started expanding in the regions in New Zealand, and then we had 3 extremely large publicly listed corporate organizations sign on for our solution. We hit this inflection point, and then we faced a new challenge, which was growth. We were going from 300-400 users out to 5,000-6,000 users very, very quickly, and ensuring that the solution could scale, we could cope with the load, we had the development resource to manage and monitor. And over the course of those 4 years, we moved our company infrastructure 3 times. And that was to ensure that we could actually scale appropriately and correctly, based on the fact that our first piece of infrastructure was local, was in a back room, I suppose, for want of a better description, not very sophisticated. Moved to our next piece, which was managed by a third party, which we were a subscription to, today, which is running out of Azure. So, you have these inflection points and growth things where you move from one system to another. And the reason why I have significantly less here today than what I did when we first started is moving your infrastructure is not for the faint-hearted and is very, very stressful to do. But so we hit this point where we're having all of these growth pains. One was around our user base was growing significantly. The other was around ensuring that we could scale our infrastructure so that we knew what we were doing. And the third thing was ensuring that we had enough staff resource, whether it's developers, whether it's clinical support, whether it's technical support for the company, for us to grow. So we faced some really serious challenges for which we literally learned on the fly as we went. Listened to as many other organizations that we could and their experience, took advice from anyone that had done what we'd done so that we could try not to replicate mistakes that they had made over time and try and do things better. Did we have some fails? Absolutely. We absolutely had some fails going through there. But, we believe that we had more successes than fails, which has contributed to our success. But the fact that we had such a good relationship with our users through the process is when we had those fails or those issues, they were on the journey with us and we were able to talk with them and get their participation in solving the fails as we've had. So if there's one piece of advice I could give today, 2 pieces of advice. A, really 101 stuff, listen to your users. B, communicate with them all the time and be engaged with the users because they are such a fantastic resource. So we were going through this growth phase and we had the inevitable conversation, which is a phone call from Australia. An organisation in Australia, which was, we understand that you're doing something in New Zealand. At that point, we had around 70% of all aged care facilities in the country using our solution. We had expanded into other parts of health as well. And we had a conversation in Australia, which was around, would we be willing to put up an instance in Australia and run? And of course, being relatively young and stupid, you go, yeah, sure, let's have a look at it without understanding what we were about to do. So 18 months later, we went live in Australia. And the reason is moving into a different jurisdiction was really challenging. It was really challenging as well because within health, we had Commonwealth or federal considerations, and we had quite diverse state considerations around how health regulation worked in Australia. It was really challenging for us to do. We had issues around, in New Zealand, you have one time zone, relatively easy. We'd never considered the concept multiple time zones across our solution and how that would work. They were serious things for us to consider when we moved into Australia. The fact that WA is 5 hours behind, and Australian East Coast is 2 hours behind, other than Queensland, which doesn't recognise daylight savings, so sometimes moves to 3 hours behind, and then South Australia, which is 2.5 hours behind. So there were major considerations around how our platform worked across universal time zones. So they were very challenging things for us to consider. And then we eventually had our first trial site, which the Australian government was involved with, or the Department of Health was involved with, and it was really successful. But it was 18 months, and probably we estimate somewhere between $750,000 and $1 million investment for us to actually do that, to expand into the Australian market. So we expanded into Australia, then it took off. We had the same issue in Australia as we had in New Zealand, where we were having real trouble coping with the growth. So we had massive growth pains. So we ended up establishing an office in Australia, appointing staff, and today our Australian office runs quite independent of our New Zealand office. They manage their own infrastructure, they manage their own support and implementation as a subsidiary of our New Zealand office. And again, if there's one thing I would say to anyone thinking about expansion into Australia, is do your homework, understand time zones. It's a critical thing to understand, and check your regulation. Check the regulations. Is there any regulation at a state or a Commonwealth level which actually can affect the way that you can operate in a different market? So the positive for us is we're operating in New Zealand, we expanded, we operate in every state in Australia now, and yet we had the inevitable phone call about 9 months ago around the United Kingdom. So we're currently investigating the United Kingdom for an expansion into the UK, which again has a whole lot of challenges. Very good positive with the United Kingdom. The positive is there's a whole lot of things related to health in the UK that are still on paper. Medications is one of them, so it's a great opportunity for us. But the other thing is we can shift our 24-hour support to UK covering New Zealand after hours and New Zealand covering UK after hours, and no one has to be on call through the night. So we have the ability to pivot our support across both countries to provide ongoing 24/7 support without having staff locally having to cover that out of hours support, which is a big positive. So we're currently in the due diligence around the UK, working through that, around how we would do that, looking at the data sets, etc., etc. So where are we at now and what are our challenges? Look, one of our biggest challenges today is staff recruitment. All of the development for our platform for New Zealand, Australia and the UK is done here in Christchurch, and our office is here. All development is in-house. We have one very small mobile app piece that we contract out to a specialised mobile app development company. Other than that, we employ all of the developers. At the moment, it's really hard to get developers, as everyone knows. Very, very difficult. So we're currently recruiting. I mean, we've got a shortage of 3 developers that we need, intermediate, senior. And like everyone else, we're actively looking. I don't like poaching or stealing developer staff from other companies, because what goes around comes around. So it's very, very difficult and very, very challenging at this point in time. Happy to take them from the government department, not so happy to take them from the vendor community. So I think that would be fair comment for all of us. The different regulatory bodies in different countries are really always a challenge for us. And the reason for that is regulation changes. So anyone operating in health will know that in New Zealand, there's been a major investment in health technology from the Ministry of Health's perspective, with a couple of very, very large projects going on. Those large projects are very challenging. And the reason they're challenging is it's one thing for government to say, this is what we like to do. It's another thing for you to be able to go away and do it. In health, funding for us to make changes in our system from government sits at around the $0 mark. So we obviously have to build with support of our current subscribers and look at the value proposition of what does this mean. The other challenge that we have at the moment is the number of hours in a day. COVID has been, from us as a solution, it's been fantastic for us for expansion, because our solution being cloud-based allows remote access. Doctors can access our solution off their phone if they want to address something related to someone who's in palliative care remotely. We can do national coverage from any point. It's been a godsend for us, and we have e-prescribing integrated into Medi-Map, so the doctor can log into our system, use our system, create the scripts. The scripts are automatically forwarded to the appropriate pharmacy, and the whole loop is closed. So the other positive for us with COVID is it forced, inverted commas, a whole lot of our users and organizations to move to VC, which reduced our travel costs by hundreds of thousands of dollars per annum. So all the implementation was done remotely now rather than on site. So there have been some positives for us. The negatives for us in the last couple of years have been watching things like the Waikato ransomware attack. Cybersecurity is a serious consideration. It's the one thing that keeps us awake at night at all times. It's the one thing that's at the top of all of our internal strategic meetings is cybersecurity, mitigating current risks, having a plan B if there's DDoS, but also having a plan C and a plan D, because there are no guarantees to the best of our ability. It's something that's always in our mind, and just wishing that maybe at some stage we should cut the cable and just operate domestically, because I think we'd feel a lot safer. The other consideration for us around the wider picture is looking at new modules and opportunities. And working in health tech, from our perspective, one of the big challenges we have in health tech is focus. So, we looked at a whole lot of different things. We specifically focus on medication management. If it's medicines, we're absolutely all over it and interested in it. There are a whole lot of things that sit on that fringe of medicines, and it's things like, should we build a care planning module? Well, we could build a care planning module, but it's not our core business, so we won't build a care planning module. It's around, could we build a pharmacy dispense system? Yeah, we could build a pharmacy dispense system, but we won't build a pharmacy dispense system because it's not our core business. So it's, for us, as being really focused, and rather than building things that we won't be good at, we're better to integrate. So one of the things that we made a strategic decision 18 months ago was to build an integration platform for our solution. So what that means is it means that all of the data that sits in Medi-Map can be shared through permissions and security, obviously, but shared across other providers within health that provide services to the same patients, so that you're not having to go, oh, I wonder what medications they're on. I have to go and look somewhere else. I can look in whatever platform I'm looking at and see a consolidated record, which includes the Medi-Map data. So we made a strategic decision to play friendly and play nice with other vendors in healthcare. And for us, it was a really good position and a good move for us. So we looked at standards in health, and those that are in health will know fire and will know SNOMED. So we looked at using those standards, which means that when our system gave data to other systems, it was in a way that machines could learn or understand and consume it quickly, accurately, and de-risk the process. So focus on what you do and how you work, sticking to your core business and being disciplined, but playing with other vendors well, for us has been a really good thing for us as a company, and it's allowed our platform to grow as a specialized niche piece of software which can integrate seamlessly across other parts within health. So I'll give you an example. So we're looking at a piece of work which is not in health. It's outside of health completely, but uses medicines. So we're looking at that from a strategic point of view. Internally, us all aren't sitting around the table going, is that our core business? And the answer for this particular scenario is yes, it is, even though it's not a traditional health portfolio or health silo. So we're building a piece of functionality which uses medications for patients in a completely different environment for the interest of the patient. So, it comes down to what your core beliefs are as a provider or a healthcare solution for us, or as a tech solution. It's what are your core beliefs or standards. So for us, we're interested in patients' outcomes, and we're interested in sharing patient data on the basis of a better outcome for the patient as part of their wider health. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we don't own the data. The patient owns the data, so we will share it. The third thing is playing well with other vendors around the delivery of health services, whether that's government, whether that's district health boards, whether that's other IT companies, is playing well and playing fairly with them. And the third thing is listening. Listen to our users. Never assume that we know better than our users. Always assume that we've got something to learn and our users can actually contribute and help us grow as a company. So that's pretty much an overview of what we've done, where we're at. Has it been challenging? Absolutely. Has it been worthwhile? It sure has. Where do we want to go? We just want to be better at what we do. So Neil, can I pass back to you on that?
Sure. Look, that's a great story, Greg. There's lots of that I didn't know. Thank you. I love the fact that you've figured it out as you've gone along and developed a solution and asked for forgiveness from the ministry after the fact. In fact, one of the questions was along those lines. Do you think the Ministry of Health would have been so friendly, supportive if you'd approached them before you developed something?
That's a really good question. That's a really good question. So the answer is I'm not sure. Okay. So in New Zealand, when we did our first piece of development, we developed it in a very isolated community, so to speak. You know, it was essentially our first iteration was one care facility, one general practice in the pharmacy. So we're pretty tightly controlled and we ran it in parallel. So we felt, no, we don't have to talk to anyone. We're just going to do this and see how it goes, because we're not ditching the regulatory requirement piece, which was the paper piece. We're running this in parallel. I believe that if we had gone down the track of asked permission before we did it, rather than ask forgiveness after, I think we would have delayed years what we would have done. I'll give you one caveat on that. Going into the Australian market, we took the exact opposite approach. We engaged with the regulator right up front. Two reasons. One, we wanted their participation, and two, their legal and their litigation in Australia is completely different to New Zealand, and we did not want to get into a situation where we would potentially face some form of litigation, because it's very, very expensive, and our insurers would not be happy if we did that. So Australia, we took the opposite. We engaged with the regulator. Australia, it was probably a 6 months delay, but that was okay. But I believe if we'd done that in New Zealand, we probably would have been years.
Love it. Very, very sensible reasoning by the sound of it. Could you give us maybe a sense of the size of the company these days from a couple of points of view, maybe the team size and composition, if you're prepared to talk about that, and also perhaps the number of customers or number of users, whatever makes sense on that side?
Yep, no problem. So internally as a company, we have, if I lump the offices together, we've got 7 staff that deal with implementation and software support for our users. So it's not a big team. We've got 7 full-time developers plus a CTO. We've got 2 admin people. And we're currently looking for 3 more developers and 2 more in our team. So round numbers, about 20, so not huge. Patients within our system, well in excess of 100,000, 20,000 users, nurses, healthcare assistants, pharmacists, technicians, general practitioners, specialists, etc., etc., etc. So quite a large cohort. We currently record around 2 to 3 million medicine administration events a day within the database. So we're talking many, many thousands per second recording going on in our solution. And that's the beauty of cloud, right? You can scale. You can scale. So as your users go up, your customers go up, your patients go up. It's not a linear scaling. You're able to scale that without massive cost occurrence to the company.
What about on the implementation side? I hear you that you're very customer oriented. You've got people on staff with clinical backgrounds.
Yep.
What does if there is such a thing, what does a typical implementation look like? There's presumably a lot of upfront engagement and figuring out what each customer is about.
Yeah, so we use a very structured approach on that, Neil. So what we do is an organisation may come to us and say, yep, we want to implement your solution. So we provide everything documented. We provide the form letters to go to the doctors, to the pharmacies, this is what's about to happen. To be completely honest now, because we've got such a large footprint, so we've got over 5,000 doctors in New Zealand using Medi-Map, the conversation with the GPs usually doesn't need to occur because they're already using it. Pharmacies, probably 65% of pharmacies in the country use the solution. Again, it's not usually that side of it's usually pretty straightforward. The care facility, obviously, we have a timeline which we work through with them around. This is the timeline of events, and we obviously work through the timelines, mark everything off, and then we go to an implementation. All of our implementation processes are all online. We have an e-learning platform, which all of our organisations. So if we turn up to a facility and do face-to-face training, we still use our online platform as part of that, or we can do it virtually using the same platform. And the reason for that is keeps the costs down, because obviously there's travel costs associated for the care facility if we travel there. But it means that if they have new staff onboarding after the implementation has been completed, they already have the resources to be able to train a new staff member, because we make the e-learning and the documentation around how to do it all available at all times to all organisations. But then our clinical staff are available at all times for all sites. So they can ring us, they can email us, they can VC us all at any time. But I'll give you an example. So with such a large block of users, we average across our both countries around 20 to 30 support calls a week. We don't have a lot of support calls, and that probably is a testimony to the fact that we engage around our UI, which means that they know how to use our system. So I'll give you an example. A GP wants to use our system, never used it before. So we register them. There's a process that we follow. We send them a video that they will never watch. We send them a user guide that they will never read. And we send them a one-page summary that they'll never look at. Okay. So what they do is they go, I'll just log in. They log in, call up the patient and go, oh, that's what I'm doing. So if it doesn't work like a mobile app, i.e. I can follow my nose, and then our UI is not good enough. So that's pretty much how we manage that.
You're right. That probably is testament to the fact that your UX and UI just work, makes sense.
Yeah.
And Matt's got a question here. I didn't know you had an addiction service module.
We do. So yeah.
Has it been well received? What prompted that?
Yeah, so that came, so Wellington DHB approached us about 4 years ago saying, hey, could we use your solution for addiction services? That's to manage drug addicts in the service, their methadone and Suboxone use. And we had a look at it and we could build that. And so we went through an iteration and build of that with them directly involved, the service involved. So Canterbury was the first DHB to implement it. So it's implemented with Canterbury DHB for the entire addiction service. And then we've rolled out now all of the 3 Auckland DHBs use it, Nelson Mulberry use it, West Coast use it, and we've got 3 more DHBs that we're about to implement. So we're bullish we think that we'll have all addiction services in the country in it by the end of next year, the entire cohort of patients in New Zealand. But it's all e-script enabled, so it solves massive problems, and it also allows the communication between the addiction services, the pharmacies, the GPs, the DHB. Everyone's operating off the same platform, so you end up with no lost in translation issues and no transcribing. So and we can produce 250 to 300 e-scripts for clients 60 seconds, whereas before it was all done manually.
And from Vaughan, what about on the competition side? I'm sure others have seen what you've done and wanted to get a piece of the action. So either in this jurisdiction in New Zealand, Australia, or further afield, there must be competitors these days.
Yeah, we've got one competitor in New Zealand, which is a pharmacy software vendor who have a solution as well. Look, competition is a good thing. And the reason I say that is it keeps pricing down, because obviously it's price sensitive market. But the other thing it does is it keeps you sharp and makes sure that you're listening to your customers all the time, because you always want to be the best at what you do. And to be the best at what you do, you need to listen to your users. So I think competition is a good thing. I think it allows customer choice as much as anything. And we're very comfortable going into tenders or RFPs, because what we're presenting then is our solution around what we do, and the customer can then make a choice amongst competitors to say, well, what fits our solution, our use case. Australia, we've got about 9 competitors in Australia. We're currently sitting at around 8% of the entire Australian market already. Remembering, of course, that the Australian market for us within health is 7.5 times bigger than New Zealand. Again, competition is a good thing. It allows us to be sharp at all times, which I think is important.
And I think a population of 70 million in the UK might be keeping you busy for a little while to come.
Kind of scares me a little bit, to be honest. So, yeah, that's not all beer and Skittles either. So, yeah.
And there's a second part to Vaughan's question is, do you own both sides of the solution, both the pharmacy and the aged care facility, or can it be mixed and matched, if you like? You talked a little bit earlier about providing an API. Maybe that's part of the story.
Yeah, so from the platform solution around what it does, the users within our system, we control contextually. So we know that's a pharmacy when they log into our system. So it creates a whole lot of different functionality, or renders functionality specific to the pharmacy. We know that's a care facility. We know that's a doctor. We know that's a corporate or whoever. So I think owns probably not the right word. I think the issue is there's a dirty big database with a whole lot of meds data in it. And then we provide contextual views and actions, which are shared amongst all of the users, appropriately shared based on who that user is. The second part of that is we're a web service, so obviously they need a browser to access, but we've done integration across some of the GP systems where a GP can be in their system and click and just opens the single sign-on in context of what's in their practice management system. So it means that we do integrate across multiple solutions, which that's our big move now, is integrating across more and more solutions. So there's 2 things around integration. One is user experience. I want to be able to seamlessly access Medi-Map from what I am currently doing in my own system. That's one, single sign-on. The second thing is whatever I've done in Medi-Map, I want a copy of that back in my home solution, whether that's a PMS or a pharmacy. And that's what our integration platform does, is it shunts the data back the other direction.
And how about you touched on earlier, the security issues and managing sensitive health data, obviously. You presumably know GDPR inside out and all the requirements in various jurisdictions inside out. So your data is presumably held in the jurisdiction in question, Australia, if it's Australia, presumably?
Yeah, so New Zealand's interesting. So New Zealand, the Ministry of Health, or the Health IT department, do have views on where you can and can't store data. And Azure Eastern and Southeastern Australia is approved for New Zealand health data. So that's where we operate. In Australia, you cannot store or utilise any data, health data in Australia, due to their data sovereignty laws outside of Australian territory. And each country has slightly different rules. So data security, absolutely critical. Can we commercialise data that we've got? No, we can't. There's strict rules around health data, utilisation of health data and ownership of health data. Very, very rigid rules. And fortunately, I think for everyone, as the Privacy Act was updated in 2020, which actually strengthened a whole lot of these concerns around health data and the use of health data. So we treat the storing and use of health data very seriously. We only share that health data in the context of a permission, or the permission being either granted by the patient or being granted by the duty of care. I'll give you an example. A patient presents to an emergency department of a hospital. They need to be able to access our solution to be able to see what this patient is on in an urgent situation. So we allow break the glass based on that user's credential as a prescriber. They are allowed to see it. In general terms, The care facility can't see any patient's data in any way or form other than their own facility. So you can't see what's going on down the road. A pharmacy can see a patient's data based on the patient's relationship with the dispensing event of medicines for that patient. So very strict rules, very strict compartmentalization of the data with, I mean, our CTO would say with rigorous controls.
And talking about CTO, I know you're not the CTO, kind of referring back to you looking for more software developers. What flavor of software developers are you after? Or it's usually posed as, what's your tech stack? You mentioned Microsoft Azure earlier, but what are the other tools that
So when we first started, our initial build was in PHP with Cake. And so we've been winding out Cake, obviously moving to stored procedures, C#, etc. So we're moving to React as a main component of our front end of the stack, and obviously C# and Microsoft SQL as our back end. So we are a Microsoft shop, absolutely. And we're transitioning more and more out of our platform over time. So, you know, as a 10-year-old company, have we got tech debt? Yep. Sad to say, we do. But we take an active position in rolling out tech, because I know if I have this conversation, you know, in this forum in 5 years, we'll have new tech debt that we've just put in. So it's a constant moving role. So, you know, what are we looking for? You know, we're always looking for, you know, back-end C# SQL developers, absolutely, always. And at the moment, we're looking for React, Azure DevOps, you know, et cetera, developers. So, you know, they're as rare as hen's teeth, I hate to say it. And it is one of our pain points at the moment.
They're out there somewhere, so good luck finding them. And that actually feels like, time-wise, it's a good time to wind this thing up. The questions have dried up a bit, so thank you to the audience for posing a few questions. Thank you to the audience for joining us, but above all, thanks so much to Greg for being prepared to tell us a bit of your story. I love the story. I love your down-to-earth way of telling it. The fact that you bootstrapped it, as far as I know, no external investment. I'm sure that was hard at times. Love the story. Thanks so much for joining us.
I think if I could just add one thing, Neil.
Of course.
The reason to our success, to be completely honest, has been a very cooperative wife.
Well, look, you must be doing something right on many fronts, having grown the team to 20 and the customers that you have. Good luck in lifting that 8% market share in Australia to somewhere closer to 100, and you won't need 100% of the 70 million in the UK to keep you busy for the next few years. So good luck with it all.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, everyone. That's it for now.